The future, mechanisms for scaling solutions in the global growth. This session will explore innovative funding mechanisms that drive the implementation of sustainable heat adaptation and cooling solutions across the region. We will also highlight successful case studies that demonstrate how strategic financing models are tackling extreme heat challenges while promoting climate-friendly cooling solutions. Join us as we uncover the financial pathways to a cooler, more resilient future. Before I invite our distinguished speakers and our esteemed moderator, once again, it's a request. There's a lot of rush at the backside. If you're done with the lunch, it's a kind request. Please settle down. Phones on silent mode once again. Everybody, please settle down. To all those who are still enjoying the lunch, I don't want to interrupt them, but they can just join us inside and have the food and enjoy the session at the same time. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our moderator for the session, Shri Safi Azan Rizvi, Advisor, NDMA, Government of India. Today, I can't risk asking for someone else, sir, and I'm really looking forward to this session. The way you started yesterday, that was amazing. Our esteemed panelist, Mr. Arun Patel, Executive Director, Climate, the Nandanjeet Khemka Foundation. A round of applause as I request him to join us on stage. Is he around? Our moderator is here. Mr. Arun Patel. Oh. Warm welcome. Ms. Nidhi Upadhyay, Deputy Director for Global Policy and Finance. A very warm welcome. Finance Climate Resilience Center, Atlantic Council. To be specific, Mr. Shravan Shankar, Co-Founder, Climate. Very warm welcome. That's the way you should join for a session, with that broad smile on your face. Lovely. Dr. Dhruvo Purkaisto, Director for Growth and Institutional Advancement, Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Very warm welcome, sir. And Dr. Huzamuddin Ahmed Zai, Partner, Mensa Milieu HB and Advisor, UNDP, who will join us virtually. Requesting our moderator to start the session. I'm sure everybody is going to enjoy it. Those who have joined us today, you'll get to know why am I saying so.
She treats me as a stand-up comedian, so I'm trying to make a bit of a change and sit down. So, is it okay if I turn my chair a bit, ma'am? थोड़ा सा ऐसे change कर ले so I can see them. Is that okay? You won't object? Okay, so thank you so much for being here. And the normal line goes that after lunch everybody is sleepy, and I'm sure you were sleepy before lunch as well. Given that in the interest of reducing GHG, Deepa Bagai ma'am has placed the temperature here at 29 degrees Celsius inside the room, and she's trying to mirror what is outside with little ventilation that I cannot see. So it is great to be back. Yesterday was a good time. I had an enjoyable 5 minutes on the podium, and it was great to meet a very well-informed minister also yesterday. So we will get onto this session. It's about financing. A lot is talked about on financing. Everybody talks about financing. At the end of the day, I've attended several seminars where everyone's spoken of financing, but we always come off with an answer which is not there. Nobody knows where the financing is coming from, and the general impression that I get is that everybody is looking for free financing. Everybody is looking for financing that comes from government of that country, and a government that is basically raising funds through taxes, or it is taking loans from its federal bank, And at the end of the day, that is also not free financing. And then that financing is going into creating heat action plans and various mitigation things, or free financing from the non-profit sector. However, little thought is given to making financing of active cooling or passive cooling means through making it profitable. Allow a for-profit to invest in technology that makes it good for his balance sheet or her balance sheet and allows them to push that in a very logical way. Like in the cool roof solution, if a paint company takes a paint and makes a cool roof paint and advertises it regularly and gets that section of business going, it'll be a profitable venture. And it'll also assist us in reducing heat stress. So things like that are some things which I think it would be nice if the speakers speak on that. Otherwise, I'm sure you prepared your piece, because the people who prepared all this document have worked really hard. I, as a moderator, had a tough time reading all this yesterday, and I made underlines and I made golus and all that on them. So I am trying to look very prepared, but I'm actually not. So what I will do is I'll take the easy way out, and I'll ask the four of you to introduce yourselves and say a little piece about what you wish to say. We will have the four panelists who are here in person. After that, we'll go to Dr. Ahmed Zai, who's online with us. And so we'll do this in about 2-3 minutes each. And then we'll have an interaction session between all of us. And we will also include the audience in it. Is that okay? Okay, so we can start with the slimmest looking young man over here, Mr. Arun Patel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rizvi. Thank you to NRDC and the World Bank and NDMA and DST for hosting this. Really a great privilege and pleasure to be with all of you and many very esteemed panelists. I represent the Nandanjeet Khemka Foundation, which is an Indian family foundation that's been involved primarily in climate change mitigation for the last 30 years. My boss, Uday Khemka, was at the Rio Earth Summit in '92, and since then, in his journey, he's primarily focused on large-scale climate finance, working with pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, focusing on renewables as a sector, electric mobility as another sector. But in the last 2 or 3 years, as the logic of the new climate reality has dawned upon us, the fact that last year we've very likely permanently crossed 1.5, we've decided to move past just working on mitigation to also explore adaptation and some novel climate solutions. So rather than, as a foundation, having a private learning journey pouring through various reports and white papers that several of our friends in various think tanks and others have worked on, we decided to have a public learning journey by last year, along with the India Climate Collaborative, co-hosting a national impacts and adaptation convening. We were very fortunate to have Dr. Vatsa as the keynote speaker and have several Indian and international academics, think tanks, civil society organizations, and funders there. The 3 key pieces that we focused on were a dedicated heat stress track, climate and health more broadly, the umbrella overarching set of issues, and then food systems. But as I now look at the program today, the program in the coming days for the Harvard Heat Summit, for which we're partnering, it's so clear that heat cuts across all of these issues. So for us coming out of that convening, and as we build out our adaptation strategy, we're focused in particular on that overarching climate and health set of issues. We're particularly keen to work, according to Dr. Vatsa's invitation to us following our convening, on translating some of the HAPs to actual actions on the ground with CSOs in bastis in Delhi and other cities, and to not only focus on municipalities, but to think about district level adaptation planning as well. So that's just a short preview. I'll be happy to dive into more details during the discussion.
Thank you so much. It is a huge pleasure to be here and to be with all the panelists, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. My name is Nidhi Upadhyay. I'm Deputy Director of Global Policy and Finance with the Climate Resilience Center at the Atlantic Council, which is a DC-based think tank. And we, at the core, work on extreme heat solutions at our center. And We also support adaptation policy and finance work stream. So this conversation is really exciting for me because bringing together the extreme heat phase with the adaptation and finance piece, which we hear a lot of the finance conversations, but we're not seeing action. So we're going to try and together break this down and see what we can do, because over the last day and a half, we've heard such good conversations, such good examples from everyone here. And I think I bring this point specifically up because there are a lot of solutions that exist, whether it's pilots, whether it's scaled up solutions. There is space for us to partner together, and we find our partnerships and see what works best. But we don't need to recreate the wheel on a lot of the work that we're already doing. So that's my first point. The second point I would like to bring up related to that is the whole conversation around systems transformation. How are we thinking with the partnerships that we will establish of changing systems, keeping all the stakeholders at the table, which includes the communities that we work with, and finance as a cross-cutting track of it. Every planning process needs to think of finance. So as we're thinking of extreme heat solutions, at what stage do we bring in the finance conversation? And the answer to that is at every stage, because we will need financing to not just test it, but also to scale it. And from then on, the third thing I would like to say, and back to your point, Dr. Rizvi, is the private sector engagement piece of it. But not just private sector engagement, but private sector engagement along with policymakers. How do you bring them together in one room? There is lack of conversation, there's lack of coordination. How do you bring them in the same room together to actually hash out these ideas? Because we don't have the luxury of time anymore to just sit and have conversations in silos. So we all need to be in rooms like these, having more conversations with what are the things that the private sector can bring to the table, specifically the private finance sector, because there's a lot of changes that banking, insurance, institutional investors can bring to the table, because they form the crux of a lot of the work that we do in terms of running the economy, and our economy is going to get affected. I would just like to bring up three pieces of our work that relate to this. In 2 years ago, we launched our call for collaboration, which is an effort to do exactly this, bring the private finance sector in the same room with policymakers and climate negotiators from around the world to actually have a heart-to-heart conversation. So it is just workshopping ideas of what are the policy gaps that affect the private finance sector, and how can you, what are the frameworks, the tools, the data tools that the private sector can bring to support close that gap. So that's one piece. The second piece is we worked on a heat action platform, which it's twofold. It's used to assess, evaluate, and create a heat action plan, and it's a publicly available tool, so anybody can go in and take a look at it and see how you can assess the vulnerabilities and create a plan out of it. And the second piece of that is a policy tool where you look at case studies from around the world. So again, you don't need to do the legwork of testing each solution, but you can learn from what already exists and take that on and use that in different contexts. You have to tweak it, of course, for localized contexts. And the third piece of this is we've tested also a parametric insurance for extreme heat in India. And I think, we all know what parametric insurance is. We've heard a little bit more about the heat work. So happy to answer more questions on it. The final thought I'll leave you with is we need to understand when we're implementing heat interventions, we need to grasp the data around it and what is the cost benefit. Like if we have data on the implementation of these solutions, there are plenty of solutions, but if we have the data around it, we can evaluate the costs and we can evaluate where the funding and financing needs to go more dedicatedly and in a more thoughtful manner.
Thank you, Dr. Rizvi. Thank you, NRDC. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation. do excuse me, I've been coughing a bit, so I may take a few pauses here and there. So I'm Shravan. I'm a co-founder of an organization called Climake, and we focus on bringing more capital into climate action sectors. We predominantly focus on what we call emerging and frontier sectors. And as my panelists have alluded to, I think all of us start off with trying to address mitigation because that is the lower hanging fruit. We have a single metric of number of tons of CO2 to be reduced. And but as the world changes, as climate impacts become more conscious, you do realize we need to be solving for adaptation. We predominantly focus on mobilizing private finance for this place. And in adaptation, where traditionally it's always been, as Dr. Rizvi mentioned, it's been about concessional capital from government or non-profits. We believe there's a very strong role for private finance to play. This is a space of opportunity, but it's also a space where you need to have a very differentiated way of thinking. A couple of things I would like to leave you with as kind of my starting point is most climate action funding in India from a private sector standpoint looks at climate mitigation for two reasons. One, it's a single metric to measure, and regardless of where you deploy it, you can show immediate measurable impact. Whereas in climate adaptation, we know it's so much more complex. The second thing is, and this is something which was alluded to in the last session, almost all climate mitigation solutions support high-income adoption. So they're predominantly B2B solutions or maybe high-income B2C solutions, maybe things like agri-DRE or certain elements of EV mobility are tailored to some adoption of low-income groups. But in adaptation, we cannot afford to take that differentiation. In adaptation, we need to be focusing on solutions which support low-income adoption. The one thing, and so what we do in that is quite diverse. We predominantly work with funds, both limited partners and also GPs, and we demonstrate and show them the opportunity and the need for them to actually start investing in these sectors. We do extensive research around this place. We show them companies who have the potential to be flag bearers for the sector. And we try and close the loop by enabling and drawing financing to come. This can come from helping to structure the long-term strategy for a fund. It can be in structuring financing instruments which need to be adopted, which is relevant for this adoption. Or it can even just be putting out public information, which we do on a very general basis. The last thing I would like to leave around adaptation predominantly is we feel we don't really feel about it. We know it's a space that most solutions are already present. It's really a problem of access. In mitigation, yes, you do have an element, predominantly you're focusing on innovation for solutions which have to emerge. In adaptation, you do have some element of that, but because you have this focus of needing to support low income and high income, you need to make it, you have opportunities to deploy. You've sorted out half the battle in knowing that what solutions are there. So you don't have to validate the veracity of a particular solution, but you have to validate access. So for us, adaptation is all about access, and the role of finance largely, which has to be addressed in this gap, is an access gap.
Thank you for inviting me, and good afternoon. My name is Dhruva Purkayastha. I'm a director with an NGO policy research think tank called CEW, the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We work across environment, energy, water, sustainable finance. One of India's leading, I would say, policy research institutions domestically operating in India. So coming back to this theme, I guess I am not an expert really technically on heating, cooling, but just learning from what's happening, what I'm hearing, what I'm listening to. I'll pick up from where Shravan left and also kind of take up from what Nidhi was talking. See, for me, I would try and address the less talked part of it, and let me come to the less talked part of it, because we have enough discussions on agri adaptation, get private financing, but let's get the basics at some level of trying to think that there is
energy efficiency, there is cooling efficiency, there is building energy efficiency. All of it is built into the products which surely the private sector will find a business or a business model to make it happen. But when we come to heat action plans, it's not very different. It's basically saying whether it's heat action plans, where do we need to adapt? We adapt, and I'll get into the context of where do we need to adapt is essentially more water, more heat, more floods. So we're essentially talking of, at a lot of levels, you're talking of urban agglomerations, right? So that for me, having worked for over almost close to 3 decades, I don't see the problem any different. It's just the situations have changed. It's not any different from sewage, street lighting, urban water supply, common parks. So at the end of the day, there are 2 parts to it that we need to always come and think about it. And talking in disaster context for NDMA, as Mr. Rizvi was talking of initially, there are 3 parts to it. One part is disaster risk reduction, which you're saying build in resilience so that you don't control disasters will happen. You increase your preparedness and adaptation, as we call it, adaptive capacity. Then you are talking about disaster risk management, which is saving people in the event of disaster. And then you come to disaster risk financing, where I'll get to parametric insurance later. But what I would like to draw attention of this learned panelist towards, at times we get lost in the climate world in trying to finance public goods to private finance. And that's clearly a intersection or a cross that should not be done. When you try to finance a pure play public good and saying, I'll create a business model out of it, you'll have to at some level rely on public-private partnerships where the government is brought onto table, whether it's a viability gap, whichever way. So at times, I'll limit the discussion to India, and with reference to the moderator, Mr. Rizvi, I'll come back on this issue of saying, I think there is a huge failure of devolved public finance in Indian context because this problem is at the local level. And I'll talk more, but I don't want to. So I'll rather take up the case of where public finance needs to go and it is not going and how it can be made to happen, which at some level will help private business models also to thrive. I'll pause here. I'll come back to address public finance.
Thank you. And you've given me enough fodder to not come back to you, given that you're talking on the word failure. So, Dr. Ahmed Zai, we can have your 3 minutes, please. Is the audio on?
Good afternoon.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm calling in from Stockholm, and I had wished I would be participating with you, but extraneous circumstances prevented that. My visa will be arriving tomorrow, so we are trying to save the climate here. So here we go. Thank you again. Just a brief introduction to myself. I've been working in the field of environment protection and financing since the mid-70s, and mostly dealing with the so-called Montreal Protocol, the most successful of global multilateral environment agreements, and then been working in the Arctic, setting up the Arctic Council's project support instruments. So I shall be sharing with you some of the experiences from these 2 efforts, and especially on the context of the cross-media aspects. And when I talk about the cross-media aspect, is that we have the Montreal Protocol, which is about the only initiative that has been successful globally. We are on the path of the recovery, and we have also contributed significantly to climate change, both in terms of avoided increase in temperature globally, but with the expansion to include Kyoto fluorinated gases, we can consider targeting another half a degree by 2100. So altogether, we are able to deliver nearly a degree and a half of avoided climate change. But there are cross media issues such as the introduction of forever chemicals, which we need to address, the waste management, and so on and so forth. So I'll delve into it a little later.
Thank you, sir.
So those were the three elements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, just one little point. I read that entire paper that you sent me, and I'm planning to do my PhD based on it. It was extremely good collation of information, especially on the Arctic project that you wrote about. But in this session, sir, we've got this very crazy clock staring at us. It doesn't give us more than 45 minutes starting now. So we will have to focus on the financing part. So all your experience since 1970, from the Montreal Pact onwards to the Arctic Ice Pact, if we can get the financing aspect out, that would be of great help, sir. So we'll start on this one subject that Dr. Purkayat has mentioned, that is government financing, public financing. Let's focus on India. Is it not going into the right direction? So in this context, it's the heat direction. So I would like to, as a person who is part of Government of India, say that Government of India has about 150 places where it has to push its funds. Heat has recently entered the formal list of hazards that Government of India has put out, where Finance Commission funding can go. And Finance Commission funds are fairly substantial, as all of us are aware. Just for those who may not be aware, India has its 15th Finance Commission gave public finance $30 billion. And those $30 billion are divided into 4 buckets. 30% is for restoration, 40% is for relief, 20% for mitigation, and 10% for capacity building. So these are large amount of monies, and just $6 billion for mitigation. That's a lot of money over 5 years, of course. Now there are several other schemes. There is a young think tank here that has done a study in which they looked at 72 government of India schemes, of which in 18 they found that they can be mildly tweaked, their designs of the houses they're going to make, or maybe the pipelines they're going to lay, mildly tweaked, and they would actually help in heat mitigation. So we are working closely with them. It's an excellent piece of information and research that they have done, which will go to inform better spending of that money, which is already part of that scheme, exactly as Dr. Purkayat was saying. So let's go to Aaron first. What is your impression from the pure non-profit side of what Dr. Purkayat said?
So just building off Dhruva's point and to your question, if we look at how civil society organizations are practicing their efforts to build every common Indian citizens access to different government schemes, there's a lot that philanthropy can do to support pilots which can access low-hanging fruit that save lives in the near term, in the coming months. So just as an example, yesterday I was in Ahmedabad with AIDMI, the All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, and several street vendors that they've been working with. They've piloted something which is quite unique in terms of direct cash grants to a small group of street vendors and allowing them to choose what they want to use that for. Some are using it to improve the kind of shade they have access to through umbrellas or through tarpaulin sheets. Others are using it to buy water bottles that prevent that basically keep the water chilled for a longer period of time through the day. Others still are using part of that to sit out a day when the IMDs put out a heat wave advisory. So if philanthropy is supporting pilots like this, then we get a preview of what can be done through the deepening access to various social protection schemes, whether it's a Jan Dhan scheme that's a direct benefit transfer or other such schemes. So I think there's a lot in that space which is quite interesting, but what we have to remember is that philanthropy here is really like the acupuncture. In terms of the pools of capital available, all philanthropy can do is nudge and try to open up the larger system, and then ultimately, of course, getting access to a range of different social protection schemes and seeing how some of them, in particular, for one that comes to mind for me, is the flagship Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Very few other countries in the world have a $10 billion right to work program that in its design at the time of its inception was meant to be green asset creation. So if we add a heat lens to some of these, and if philanthropy in varied districts and states across the country can show how those funds can be used effectively, I think it could be very interesting.
So that's an interesting point you raised, that basically non-profits can operate in a certain section in various parts of the country and various sectors, and it is for basically the public finance to come in and the public the infrastructure and to learn from you that these are your experiences and then take that forward.
I completely agree with what you just said and Dhruba's point about the fact that we have to keep in mind the public good element of things, and that philanthropy and non-profits can operate on the margins trying to show what those models can look like, but ultimately the public good needs to be backed up.
So Nidhi, on this public good thing, so as Mr. Purkayat said that the public good should largely be financed by public finance and not by the non-profits. So what is your impression from the kind of work that you have done? It can also give us a window on the kind of the work that you have done that you were speaking of when you spoke initially.
So I would agree that you can't privatize all the public goods. So I fully agree with that. But I do think that there are technologies, there are frameworks, there are things that the private sector is working on and building that could benefit the strengthening of public goods, that could benefit the scaling of public goods. So if there is, let's just take data for example, or I think there was a point in the earlier panels on accessing worker data or collecting worker data. Can we use private sector to collect data that is relevant to creating solutions for communities and to strengthen, say, nature-based solutions? So there are things that the private sector can do, and that's where I think the public-private partnership piece also comes in, where we need to work together, because if we work in silos, it's not beneficial for the larger economy if we have to put the economy in focus as well.
Yeah, very well taken. And I am part of government, and I know, just as Mr. Shravan had mentioned shortly a while ago, that you need to put people in one room so that they talk. So I've been in that room at least once a day, where there are people who are non-government and they are telling you that this is the best way to go. And then you start finding that there are two more people who are non-government who are telling you, no, this is not the best way to go. Like recently I heard there is a counter science to blue and green roofs also. There is some logic and science to that. I haven't yet delved into it, so I won't know. So this point that you mentioned, Mr. Shankar, can you respond to this? That what is your experience as a founder of Climate, of how the government behaves with, when you were new company? What is your impression of government? What do you think government should change in behaving with you?
So, especially around climate, what we've seen is that any climate solution is either an alternative to something that's already existing. You think of something in mitigation, it's more efficient, renewable source, but it fundamentally has a similar output. And even in adaptation, we are looking at, but in adaptation, it could be a bit different, because ultimately we're looking at what are effects that need to be prevented. These effects are getting more intense, and therefore we need to find a way to actually create that incentive for adoption. So for us, and we've seen this very clearly in mitigation, government has been the biggest market maker. Government, by instituting, say, compliance standards, instituting incentives, subsidy models and everything, they have helped to develop every market in climate that's actually existed. None of these markets have actually evolved as a result purely of just market opportunity. They've needed that leg up from government. One case that we really like talking about quite a bit is in the waste and circularity space, where there has been issues with, how it's always been a huge problem area. But the way the government basically instituted things like extended producer responsibility created this whole incentive for much more higher end recycling solutions to come in. So today we are on that path that our quality of handling waste is so much better. And in the heat case, for example, cooling action plan is that sort of policy which can potentially do a lot more. Right now, it's more of a guiding document. It's not an implementation-based document. But I think one of the things we have really seen the last 5 years, I would say for sure, is that government has understood that they are in this role of how do we set up policies to make markets. And that is how you start adapting and kicking things up. We play a role in doing fund advisory when we work with different types of funds. We're working with a fund right now, which is based out of the US, which is looking to invest only in cooling solutions in India. And the only reason they have that conviction is because there's a document called the India Cooling Action Plan.
So that's good incubation. The point about incubation you mentioned, that somebody has to start the whole game going. So before I go to Dr. Purkayast, I just want a show of hands. How many people want the temperature to come down from 29 to 25? Okay, so can the hotel staff please kind of increase the air conditioning slightly? We'll take the blame for the GHGs. Yes, Dr. Purkayast.
No, thank you. This is interesting. In the sense, cooling load is also a question of, look, at some level, one is, I was hearing the design of cities. This is a long-term design of cities, like the urban planning that we do. We have never factored all these in. So there's a long-term aspect of certain things for sure, where building standards, codes, road design, the kind of facades that we use in our residential and building, the brick material, all of it is a matter of urban planning, leaving spaces, green places. But if you face, and Mr. Rizvi, I'll kind of talk about, let's say, NDMA, the fabulous work on cyclone shelters and you'll look at it, in 2004 in cyclone, probably a lakh of people died. Today, 5 people get affected in Odisha. So there is an aspect of improvement that has happened, undoubtedly. Now the whole issue is, if I translate that to heat, I have one acute part of it and one chronic part of it. Chronic part of it is my temperature rise, wet bulb, humid, morbidity, not able to work. You have all of these impacting gender in you, all of these, and you'll have to gradually cope up with it. There is one acute part of it, which is like heat waves, which is like common, like even urban floods. And if I now focus on just the urban local bodies, India is 35% urbanization, is going to go more. Ultimately, there is cities and these. I mean, India by scale is probably 70 or 81 million plus cities that urban local bodies we have, and that's your agglomeration. I think we need to improve on that. Even if we say it is public finance which has to, how different is a heat shelter from a cyclone shelter? Who is going to build that stream through or urban forestry that was getting talked of? So there will be private models. I see that happening, and I see the role, Aryan, from the philanthropy is pilots, informing policy, all. But there has to be a scale of investment which happens. But then if we put it back onto public finance, we have to also start thinking, where is the government going to get revenues from? Now, there has to be directed taxes. What is a public finance tax solution for that? Because one is a devolution issue, 15th Finance Commission, 16th is on, 42% that needs to get down to the urban local bodies. And the second, in Indian context, and I'll end here, is is the thought that I think the 74th Amendment to the Constitution, which empowered the financial devolution to urban local bodies, which has not happened in 30 years, I think needs to be looked at because they are the affected people. I can come back and there is one last point I want to leave it, because the cooling thing will tie up to Kigali sign off in some way. And there you probably need a repeat of Montreal, because there somebody paid the industry to change the refrigerant. Here you'll now need to change HFC. So we are staring at a complex problem. We do not know how this will go ahead.
Excellent. You've given us an opening to go to Dr. Ahmed Zai. So Dr. Ahmed Zai, somebody funded the Montreal Protocol. Hence, the ozone hole stitched itself up. Do you think we are at a stage where there is somebody who will fund some aspect of the initiative that you had written about, the Arctic Ice Pact?
Right. I think I would like to sort of join in the sentiments expressed by the last speaker. It is very important to understand that to have a repeat of the Montreal Protocol is probably not possible, and it will take a long time. And that is where I was coming from on the experience of the Arctic. Remember, the Montreal Protocol was established in 1987. We started with only about 25 countries. There was an ownership, and that's the most important aspect, to have an ownership of the issue, and then everybody joins in. We within 1 year we established the multilateral fund. So that is how fast it was unique in this respect. In the case of the Arctic Council, it took nearly from 2002 to 2014 to activate. But then when such a financial instrument, but when you go about doing it, there is an opportunity to target a number of sectors, and that is where we need to come, because when we are looking at the issue today facing, it's not just the climate, it is not only the ozone layer, but we have a huge problem with waste management. We have the interfacing issues on the land and water use, biodiversity. So that is where, if you look at it, there is enough finance available, but it is important to design the project properly. And that is where there is an opportunity of looking internally and externally and establishing some sort of an initiative which targets, and that is possible. For example, when I take up the third pole, which is the Himalayas, there is an opportunity to work out a solution.
So, sir, may I come in here for a second? From your perch, how do you see the world today? Because the world today, with regard to finance, whether it's the loss and damage fund or whether it's any other kind of financing, there was a 1 trillion, or it was almost a $1.5 trillion pact between BlackRock and Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan, all the big investment houses, in which they had said that we will only fund projects that are good for climate. And that pact also seems to be now chipping away, and it seems to be reduced to 1/3 of its size. So with changes in the political situation all over the world, with such finance which could have come from Western nations or Western multilateral organizations, most likely the probability of which is much lower now, where do you think that countries will be able to finance heat stress reduction?
Excellent question. I will only share with you my personal experiences with such financing. We launched climate-related private-public partnership many years ago on the voluntary carbon markets, and also within the multilateral fund. There was a window many years ago. Allow me a bit of technical complicity here. when you are producing these ozone depleting substances, especially R22, which is one of the gases used in refrigeration, which is also used as a feedstock for Teflon, which is a PFAS, forever chemical. These are exempted uses, and there is an issue of R23, which is a very extremely potent greenhouse gas. Now, the cost for that gas is about, say, $1 a ton, a ton of CO2. We sold it for $3 to the local entity, and they in turn sold it for $10 with the arbitraging. This is where the transparency and opaqueness comes into play. As soon as the market collapsed, everybody exited. So these are the issues that are associated. I'm skeptical personally on the voluntary and flexible financing, and that is where I find that conventional financing is the most effective one. It may take time, but you need to have an ownership of an issue, and then pull together your own financing in a manner. There is enough capital out there, but the projects and ensuring that you are not able to impact other sectors. Just look at the issue of waste management. Just outside Delhi, we have a huge amount of waste which is accumulating, and that is impacting the health and the water and all those issues. But for example, in Sweden, we are taking in a lot of waste from all over and turning it into remote heating and cooling solutions. So they are, and it is virtually making gold out of waste. So there are an opportunity, but that is where one has to make sure that you have a good governance.
Thank you, sir. That was very valid points you were raising. So from what Dr. Ahmadzai has said, that as such we may not get funding directly from sources where we got in the previous Montreal Pact round. So we are left to ourselves as a country, and as a country we are left to government, we are left to non-profits, we are left to for-profit CSRs, and we are left to people themselves, and we are left to companies that are making a profit. The example of Cool Roof Paint. So the technologies that are being pushed, as in the cooling solutions, those cooling solution technologies, are they enough to make a company a profit? If you have any experience in that, you could tell us, or anybody who has could initiate this, a response to this. Are there any technologies you're looking at in your work?
I'm happy to take up one aspect of this where it talks about the whole, adoption. We have a huge cooling access gap, like 8% is of households, and we have so much of building footprint coming up. There's a whole question on how do you make this affordable and accessible, and these are technologies which are validated. So you have the technology in place, you know the market's coming up. What's the gap? The gap is affordability. So the more, probably the larger form of new innovation we're coming in, which we're seeing, is around business models. You're seeing this whole aspect called cooling as a service, which to a person who's basically, to like this hotel, for example, their financial burden is not based on having to acquire this entire system accordingly, but it's based on their use. But at some level, that asset has to be financed. But what we are seeing is that we are seeing opportunities for, like Dr. Ahmadzai was saying, conventional finance to come in to fund a particular asset, but then to the end beneficiary who has probably more constraints, they are giving much more flexibility in how they can access these solutions. So for us, regardless of what you see, we work around cold chain, we work around different areas of space cooling, we work around supporting insulation companies. It's all about this thing of how do you convert what traditionally would have been this big one-time cost to a much more smaller set of...
Super. So that means you're saying that cost reduction of whatever technologies you're pushing in, apart from having cost reduction, you should also have efficiency enhancement alongside.
So it's not exactly cost reduction, but it's just think of it as cash flow management. My one-time cost, rather than paying something which would have been a huge amount, I spread it over 4 years. So that's sort of the benefit that I'm
Okay. Dr. Ahmadzai, we'll come to you after Dr. Purkayas. He has a point to make, then we'll come to you.
I agree with Shravan. This is about amortizing over time, essentially servitization as we call it. Even roads were built by annuity models, which could be. But there is an important point to understand. So, of what is technology? I mean, we can come to technology later, or we can think of different technologies. And there are different technologies in cooling too. But for us, in terms of what we need to keep in mind is two small points. One, if today I were to give you an example of clean air in Gurgaon is a private good. If you can afford at your house, you afford a air purifier, it's fine. But otherwise, the government does not give you clean air at all. It's a private good, right? So similarly, you afford an air conditioner, you keep your air conditioner, it's a private good. Now you want to make it a district cooling. If it needs to make it a service, that's a whole new structural change of thinking. Because even clean air in NCR is not a public good. So on technology, the point is viability, business model innovation is fine. But what we see in technology is often we become prey. Policy gets captured by technology. And that is seriously avoidable. Policy makers get captured by technology, because I can tell you many examples of that. I don't want to give. In the phone that you using today is a capture of policy getting captured by technology. We need to be careful in waste. We need to be careful in refrigeration, because there are many alternative refrigerants. Whether Montreal or happen, I kind of agree that it's difficult to get that Montreal repeated. But let's also understand that there will be technologies will take shape, they will become efficient, but we need that divide and that some part of public finance to enable that to happen.
Thank you. Dr. Ahmadzai.
So briefly, you see, what we have to tackle, I've been a number of times in New Delhi, and I've seen how the weather has deteriorated, the air is difficult to breathe. And one of the issues are our perverse subsidies. Globally, we are providing virtually $10 trillion a year to bad subsidies. And the same issue is, and that is preventing a lot of good technology coming in, and it is an issue which is the big elephant in the house. So that is very important, and the specific solutions, the health impact that are happening due to bad air, the drinking water, are never counted for. You don't integrate it in your calculations.
Thank you.
So this is where the challenge lies.
Thank you, sir. Aaron?
Just briefly to build on Dhruva's really crucial point about district cooling, which could be really interesting to explore in affordable housing or industrial townships or other such applications. Once the technology risk of a new innovation like that has been achieved, I think philanthropy can come in to actually lead de-risking processes through a 5-step process, essentially. The first, which we to an extent already have in place in terms of sending a clear market signal. We've achieved that in many different sectors in India, notably recently in the electric bus sector. The second is figuring out all of the enabling environment issues of policies and regulations and contracts and so on. The third is that of pipeline creation and demand aggregation. If we're able to bundle together these assets, then it could look lucrative as an investment for some of the larger, perhaps institutional investors. In terms of India's National Electric Bus Program, Mahua Acharya did that very successfully through CESL. And once you have those 3 steps in place, that's where then blended finance could be injected. Because we don't have endless pools of concessional capital. Rather than using those scarce units to start a process, if we can bring those units in once we've done some of the homework, finally then at the end we can syndicate this to the right types of investors. This process that I'm describing is something that we, the Khemka Foundation, helped Mahua Acharya with in terms of the creation of a payment security mechanism for India's electric bus program. And we are really glad that in addition to public money coming in, with the Indian government putting in $240 million into that PSM, some bilateral money as well, philanthropy came in, most notably GHCF with $135 million into that PSM. similar models could apply to issues like district cooling as well.
Right, thank you. So we'll go to Nidhi on a question on insurance, but before that, I have a governmentish grouse with the non-profits, and I'll give you an example of glacial lake mitigation. So glacial lake mitigation is a direct consequence of global warming, and primarily all the heating going on in the sea surfaces and the land surfaces is leading to melting of glaciers. This deglaciation is increasing the size of several glacial lakes. India has only 7,500 glacial lakes, of which we've identified 200 which are at high risk. So we've taken a few expeditions up. We started this program in a real, crazy type of mode a year and a half ago. So we visited about 40 of those 200. We've placed automated weather stations at least 2 of them already, 3 of them, and they're working very well. But they're working at 5,000 meters. That's 16,000 feet. And that is -10 as of right now in March. So I have tried my best personally as advisor in NDMA to get a lot of the big non-profits in India working on just helping the state government get those AWSs. They have 11 or 12 sensors, and they have a solar panel, and they have a communication system via some kind of a satellite communication system. I don't think it will cost more than 20-30 lakhs to make and to operate maybe 1 lakh a year. And but I have not found much interest. So I'm making a point here. I have seen that a lot of money from the Indian non-profits or even foreign non-profits is going into climate mitigation, a point that you have made in the questions that you wanted to answer on. A lot of it has gone into climate mitigation, which means reduction of GHGs, simply put. Climate adaptation does not get too much money. What in climate adaptation does get money is capacity building. Now, capacity building is collect 20 people, give them a lecture, give them good food, and they go home. And some of them remember, some of them put it on LinkedIn, some of them put it on Twitter. But the kind of lasting impact from that capacity building, there are few programs that do it, but I have some doubts about that. So this is what I'm talking about is adaptation, which in disaster lingo we call adaptation, disaster mitigation, reduction of risk. So if there are AWSs in 200 of the high-risk lakes, minute to minute you're getting updates on the temperature, the humidity, the moisture, and the various other things. And then soon you will have early warning systems which will come from that. So why am I not able to shake those non-profits? I've spoken to many of them and tell them that try something new. Go to Arunachal Pradesh, go to Sikkim, go to Mizoram. Why do you want to do it in Bangalore and Hyderabad? Now, this is not a generalization, but it is a generalization. So how do you respond to that?
I completely agree with you, Dr. Rizvi. I feel like if we look at the global landscape of all giving, philanthropic giving, many people in the room will be familiar with the statistic that only 2% of annual philanthropy goes to climate change mitigation. That's in the range of 7.8 to I think $12.5 billion, according to Climate Works Foundation. Adaptation in 2023, I believe, only received $600 million, slated to increase to maybe $750 million in this next year. If we then think about the issue in India and broaden it from just HNI and foundation giving to, for example, CSR as well, there remain so many fundamentals of development that we are still trying to address. That willingness to take bets on some of these new ideas has been a little limited so far. I think that's changing, and that's incredibly encouraging. I think there's also some really good examples of how global philanthropies may mobilize very quickly to address some of the shortfalls in terms of global monitoring, which NOAA has provided in the US. Philanthropy may be able to step in and actually provide the resources for some of those services in a quick and interesting way. The UK government has set up something called the Advanced Research and Invention Agency that's working on something similar to what you just described, Dr. Rizvi, in terms of tipping point detection and creating early warning systems for the subpolar gyre in particular and its global consequences. But coming back to that point about the fundamentals of development, in terms of, many think tanks will say that Indian donors prefer to focus on things like education and healthcare. Well, now when we think about heat in particular, we have no choice but to actually lump together climate and education and climate and health. I feel students haven't been spoken about much at all in the discussion about extreme heat. If we think about the long-term impacts of the cognitive impacts of heat on kids, their ability to study, their ability to sleep, their ability to play, not only in urban settings where there's limited open spaces, but more broadly. And then if we think about going back to that point about cyclone shelters, the role of the public education system in terms of mitigating extreme heat. Like, we made a mistake, I think, during COVID of having school closures for far too long. We can't afford to do the same thing with school closures due to air pollution issues or due to extreme heat, because the schools may be providing more thermal comfort than people may have in bastis with tin roofs and tarpaulin sheets. So bringing this back to philanthropy, absolutely we must be ready to fund some of the more novel issues where you don't see that direct kind of benefit in an attribution sense. But we should also be doubling down on the fundamentals of development. I just gave an education example. I can speak more about health as well.
Thank you. So just by way of information, we just recently, last year, we started a $20 million program on glacial lake mitigation for 4 states. So that we are putting up some AWS and all based on that. But this is where we want the non-profits to come in. And I'm going to use the means of this panel to grab you and call you in for a meeting and then make you bring in all kinds of non-profits so that we can make this a campaign. And
if I can just say, we completely welcome that. Dr. Vatsa has called us in to make a number of other important calls to action, but would welcome engagement on this front as well.
So I will keep you focused on glacial lakes. And Dr. Ahmadzai will come to you after Nidhi. So Nidhi has been trying to make a point on parametric insurance, and I would like her to delve on what's wrong with parametric insurance. We know of that AIDMI example where they Seva and all are doing some kind of a program. But what more would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, I think the point that I'll make, we've also piloted this with Seva and Blue Marble, the insurance company, and we started with this in 2023. We piloted it. Of course, there was a lot of learning from it because it was the first time that a heat parametric insurance was created. I think what, and has been mentioned in the previous panel as well, what is working is we need insurance right now to cover the gap in the income or the loss of income that is happening, in the loss of productivity that is happening for, we specifically through Seva work with women, but I think in general with the loss of productivity that we're seeing. In addition to that insurance, we need a bunch of other things, which are the risk reduction measures or the wraparound supports. So these are immediate tools that these women can use. But I think extending that beyond, to start thinking of, if these women are working in the construction industry or if they're working in different industries, what can these industries come together and do to create risk reduction measures so that the insurance companies will want to continue providing that parametric insurance. So I think that's the piece where we have to find a balance between the adaptation measures, which I think to the question that you had asked earlier, the adaptation gap and how do you fill that gap is knowing what is the localized requirement for it. Because once we understand that, we can have more targeted resilience assets geared towards it, which brings down the burden on the insurance and the parametric insurance piece of it. And then I think one other piece that will be extremely valuable for parametric insurance to be even more successful is the full integration of early warning systems and understanding how that puts the triggers onto the insurance. And there is a lot of other data that you can add to, I think, customize that insurance trigger, which is specific to what industry these women are working in or people are working in, what environments they're in, what geographic locations they're in. So gathering as much data as possible in terms of whether that's health data, health sensors, home sensors and other things, which can really make insurance even more effective than it is currently.
Excellent. So again, to share a little bit of governmental experience with you. So we were, again, for a year and a half, we've been chasing insurance and figuring out, we've been working closely with Department of Financial Services on how we can scale up insurance. So parametric insurance came as a very good, obvious choice, and then heat for poor people, for especially construction workers and all that, it's a great support. Now the thing is, when you go deeper into this, a lot of the companies, we've spoken to all the global reinsurance companies and the ones in India as well, they say that, okay, at the end of the day, the market is not getting initiated, government has to do something. So suppose government puts a few funds into insurance. So if you look at the maths is that if 100 rupees is the premium that then insurance companies as a set receive, the payout will be 60 to 70 rupees. Otherwise, the insurance companies will close shop and go home. However, if I in government look at my balance sheet, over a period of 10 years, I have paid 1,000 rupees and I've got back only 600 rupees. So at the end of the day, I shouldn't have paid the 1,000 rupees and I should have just paid the 600 directly to the affected people. Get the logic? So there is serious logic over there. Serious logic which militates against insurance. However, there is a very, very important cut to this. And that cut is that if this 600 rupees is paid by one balance sheet as in GOI, compared to 36 balance sheets of state governments and one of GOI, 37, compared to every single individual who has covered the story of life insurance, if it is retail paid, if the risk is shared and the premium is also shared. If the premium is shared, then that's 1,000 rupees is paid by 0.1 rupee by every individual. So it's a very small amount on everybody's personal balance sheets. So the only way insurance can become standardized and the only way parametric insurance or anything else can move forward is when the insurance companies, they take it down to the retail level. What they do is basically they feel that, it's easier to get the government to pay all the premium. So we've been really fighting that. And we are seeing as people who are stalling it, but at the end of the day, that is a government point of view. So so Nagaland is one state that has gone forward. However, that question does keep arising all the time. Yeah.
I think in response to that, I'll go back to the initial point that I was making of bringing people in a room. I know you are in rooms all the time, but I think the more conversations we have, the more you bring this up, the more there is an opportunity for insurance companies to also think. It's a challenge for them to also think through this. So how can we push each other to start thinking more creatively about this? Because it's not a problem that's going away easily, and we all have to deal with it. We're all going to be victims of it. We are already victims of it. So I think that's where it is. There is a great need for us to sit in a room and really rethink what our roles are in this ecosystem and devise strategies which are going to be sustainable and long term.
Thank you. So we have now very little time left. So we go to Dr. Purkayas, then to Shravan, and then to Dr. Ahmadzai, and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Hi, thanks. So just continuing the point on insurance, I know, Mr. Rizvi, that's complex, but if you actually look at Ayushman Bharat, which is subsequently RSBY morphed into what we call Ayushman Bharat, and we have a lot of empanelment, enrollment into it. It is essentially that same thing where the government is actually paying the premium and it's getting distributed. So was Fasal Bima Yojana. So this brings me to that same thought process, because at some level there was a talk about financial resilience, which means you need to pay out social protection to affected people. That is what I heard. So if you need to pay out social protection, which is basically doles too, so it can be clubbed with Manrega or any other scheme. Apart from trying to think, it can also possibly the insurance, I'm not too sure, can be factored in if it is parametric. No, it is indemnity. So you'll have to separate indemnity and parametric. You can't really have, you need to have both, because that's indemnity insurance. Maybe possible, but I'm not too sure whether parametric insurance, government paying out the premium, maybe not. But to start with, the insurance companies will look for what you exactly said, because they're not going to go around getting the entire market covered. That's a huge cost for the insurance company. So you'll have to have some kickstarting.
So
That's
we are
right.
already having a lot of room conversations. So Mr. Shravan, and that please notice that bell that went.
No, so I'll take this as a chance to give a bit of a closer as well. I think one thing I wanted to touch upon that Aaron mentioned was this whole thing about district cooling. There's and something that Dr. Ahmed Zaid mentioned, which was there's a lot of capital available. There is capital notionally available, but that capital is not flowing. So why is the capital flowing? Is you want to call it the $1 million question, but it's a larger number. One big reason is for a lot of people, for a lot of potential funders, they haven't seen a validated, effective deployment happen. So they feel this is too high risk because we haven't seen an example. So there's this term which has been bandied around called first of a kind. And for me, that's where philanthropic capital has a really good role to play for blending private finance. Because there's this whole question on how we talk a lot about blended finance with philanthropic capital. It's a very aimless conversation because we don't talk enough about what is that aim that we want it to happen. There's two things that primarily I feel that blended finance can really do, and this is regardless of what sector. One is to provide enough of, let's say, a scaled order that a company is able to develop a solution at a lower cost, which starts becoming cost competitive. But the more important thing I feel it can do is to really demonstrate at this whole first of a kind approach. Traditionally, first of a kind has meant you move from technology pilot to technology commercialization, but I think that stands for anything. It stands for first of a kind from a business model experience, servitization, like Dhruva had mentioned and all that. So, and heat resilience, at least the way I see that, it's again, I go back to this point that I mentioned earlier. Private finance comes in when there's an opportunity. Yes, what is public good cannot be actually taken into it, but it comes in again. The opportunity comes in based on the effects that are happening. Cooling comes in because it's a solution against health effects of too much heat stroke. Parametric insurance is coming in as an example, which is around addressing that whole job loss and job avoidance thing. Adaptation risk financing is coming around risk reduction that Nidhi had also mentioned. So all of these things is really, it starts becoming a very distributed opportunity coming in. But like all the people here on the stage, they're all part of that same journey, but at very, very different stages.
Thank you. Dr. Ahmed Zaid.
Thank you, Ehsan. I think there are 3 points that I want to make very quickly. The first being on district cooling. Now, I was the one we initiated it in the Montreal Protocol, but the way it is structured, it is going in for incremental cost coverage, whereas the solutions that we are seeing in the context of district cooling and district heating, these are major cost savers. And it's a business model where everybody has a win-win. And that is why I started a study before the COVID, together with the Terry and the Swedish government in India, in Punjab and Haryana, to tackle the issue of the pollution as well as these issues. So happy to continue on that in order to provide this particular case where we can go in for the smaller communities and address the issue of balanced heating and cooling remotely, which we have different names. That was one aspect. The second aspect is, I must say that institutional strengthening within the context of what we are doing is extremely important. And this is one of the major reasons of the successes of Montreal Protocol, where we established a global network to be able to communicate, and we then have a tunneling effect of the information exchange that our colleague Mr. Patel was talking about on which is the smoothest path forward, and if I have a problem, how can I attempt it? And then when we have a commitment from the government, there is a follow-up on these issues. So there is a big benefit, and I think it is an extremely important element of success in whatever we are doing in the cross media. And finally, I was extremely happy to hear Ehsan and talking about my issue, which is extremely close to my heart, and that is the third pole. You talked about the glaciers and the melting, and there's a huge amount of potential to exchange the information and data. And in this respect, I've initiated a non-paper together with our colleagues in the neighborhood on these issues. And I'll be happy to share it with you, and maybe we can come forward on some cooperation, which I think can include, there are a number of fora which we can discuss, but there's a paucity of time here within the community and the outstanding amount of expertise and the financial cloud that is available, and it is doable. So you do it by ourselves, and that's the way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So now we'll quickly take maybe 2 questions. Are there any? Yes, please.
Hi.
Your name, organization, and question.
Yes, my name is Avinash. I represent Sustainable Living Lab. So I want to elaborate on the insurance points that we're making, right? So we have been speaking mainly about financial risk, if I'm not wrong, when we're speaking about insurance here. But we are in a heat resilience conference, right? So what about the physical risk aspect of, financing? So does insurance lead organizations and governments neglecting adaptive capacity building? So because I'm getting insured, am I being negligible towards building seawalls, for example, right? Protecting the physical risk aspect of things. So from that point of view, is no insurance better? Something like reducing premiums for people who have installed adaptive capacities, something like that better? Or, yeah, please, can you elaborate on that?
I'm gonna try and sum this up. So in terms of when we think of insurance and we think of income loss, we're also mindful of the fact that that income which they could have earned could go towards protecting their health or using that towards any health costs that may come up due to the fact that they have lost a day of work or that they are unable to get food on the table. So there is that aspect of it. So there is the income loss aspect of it, but it relates to the health of the woman, the family that she's with. So that's one piece. And I think it's not taking away from any of the other work that is being done, because these are separate. We need to think of the infrastructure, and that's where the resilience assets and building resilience using adaptive measures of whether that's building a seawall or planting of trees, that needs to happen for sure. But we cannot forget the lives that are being lost because of extreme heat, and that's where the parametric insurance for communities comes in.
Thank you. So she's very right. The basic physical risk part that you mentioned, the whole thing is that the physical risk is obviously there, that of heat and the negative impact that it comes with. And the financial risk is what is covered through insurance, that if you lose a day's work, then there is some money coming by. So it's important for poorer workers who work in the organized or unorganized sector. There is an excellent study by the Institute of Economic Growth and the Indian Statistical Institute by Dr. Saudamani Das and Dr. Somanathan. They have published it in November of last year, and it is a study which kind of proves with a lot of data, so much data that I got completely confused and I had to ask others to tell me, is this right? So that data tells you that for every increase in 1 degree of temperature in Delhi in its summers, in the slums, it costs them 13% loss in wages across a season. So they went to 2 slums, spoke to 400 people at length on a daily basis, and finally found that in the whole season, because of heat days, they lose 40% of their income. So some of it is physical risk that you don't get to work, some of it is you fall ill, and some of it is that the expenses that you had to make, those expenses became higher because there are others also who didn't come out to work, so you had to go to a slightly more expensive shop to buy your vegetables. So it's a beautiful study. You must look at that, and it may possibly answer your questions. Thank you for your question. Yes, please. used the beautiful word incorrectly. There's too much usage of that word in the global scenario these days.
Thank you so much. My name is Rahul Ajmera. I'm a student at Stanford University in California. And I guess my question is, some prior panelists have mentioned that we have the solutions, we have to finance and deploy. And I think a point that you made here is that there's also an opportunity for innovation and scaling up new solutions, novel solutions that don't exist just yet, but we can kind of bridge the gap in adaptation, mitigation, and so on. So I'm curious, just if you could talk through, if you had X amount of resources, like how much allocation of money would you put in each of those two solutions? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't. That's going to be a bit difficult thing to say definitively, but I think it's worth looking at it from, I think building resilient capacity and risk reduction is probably one of the most useful things that we could do, because ultimately we are looking at how do we just making the effects of these things of heat and all that less. As much as we can solve for that, that's the most effective thing that we can do. So I would definitely put it in the bucket that whatever innovations or solutions work that allow for that to happen. So like I was saying, with access to cooling solutions, which makes it more affordable for more people to adopt. I was talking to Deepa about fans and energy efficient fans, and how a scheme like that should be like what's happened with LEDs should be what's adopted, because it has a huge benefit around cooling. So because it just reduces risk. So for me, that's what my first priority would go with. And if where we can't do that is areas where parametric insurance and so on.
Thank you. Dr. Ahmadzai?
Well, I would like to, it was a very good and pertinent question put forward. I'll give you the experience of what we did practically when we set up a fund together and the owners. Now that is the prerogative of the owners, and in consensus, what they decided was they would, for example, earmark hazardous waste management and POPs. They put in 40% for that. Mercury mitigation, demonstration of project for that 25%, and clean production 20%. So in other areas and some of the standard. So what we did was, okay, this is the amount of money, and this is how we will target. So that was one solution which functioned pretty well, and of course you can adapt that as we go along. So these are very important steps, and as soon as the projects come, you move on them. Thank you,
sir. So quickly, to respond to your point, what Government of India does, it gives those 4 buckets, 10, 20, 30, 40% for capacity building, mitigation, response, and reconstruction. That's the way the Government of India distributes its funds. It could have done the other way around also, but it chose to do it this way because it was felt that the importance of this aspect is that much more. So one of the few countries that has put together, put aside money separately only for mitigation is India. That's the second level when we design a program, like we've designed a program for glacial lake mitigation. There's one program for landslide mitigation. So we again cut it into 4 buckets. What we do is, one bucket is for assessment, where you do your hazard assessments, you do all your geospatial surveys. At the second level, you put in monitoring and early warning systems, a very important part. As Nidhi said, that early warning systems must become, a part of our entire program. And at the third stage, we have pure mitigation measures, that if you want to reduce the level of a lake, that's a mitigation measure. If you want to come up with a cooling system which is efficient, that is again a mitigation measure. And then we leave about 10% for capacity building. So there are various ways, hazard-wise, you can distribute funds depending on the importance, the disaster risk index of the location where you're working. So it's actually a 4D matrix. It gets very confusing, and even I'm trying to wrap my head around it. But we've had a good discussion today. Thank you for your question. And I'm sorry, we would have liked to ask more people, but there were a lot of us, and all of us appear to be very intelligent people. We had a lot of points to make. So thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you, Nidhi. Thank you, Shravan. Thank you, Dr. Purkayas and Dr. Ahmadzai. Thank you.